Today we're talking about our personal worst practices for communication, marketing your ministry, and Melissa shares a few tips on fishing. It's the Sustainable Ministry Show. This is episode 30. You don't split worms in half. Awesome. Hey guys, we're so glad to be back with the Sustainable Ministry Show. Again, hanging out with Melissa Rao and Stephen Ingram and myself, Bryant Johnson. And we're going to take a few minutes today really to kind of wrap up our conversations from the past week about communication. We talked about that in a number of different ways, from how the church communicates with people who are absent or have been MIA, to whether or not we can even talk about like politics within our ministries or within our churches. And so communication's kind of been the highlight, but I'm wondering from the two of you as we get started, what has been maybe the worst practice of communication you have adopted within your ministry, within your work in the past?
I will be
great example, actually.
Throw myself. You've got a great answer.
I will be more than happy to throw myself on the sword to begin with. I'm not going to take the one, because we talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to take the one that you brought up, Brian. I'm going to take a different one and say I think one of the worst ones that I've practiced is whenever I feel like if I communicate it once or in one way, that I've done my job. Most studies will tell you need to communicate in 5 to 7 different ways if you want it to get through all the white noise. We live in a time and place where we're constantly inundated with messages, whether it's driving down the road with radio and billboards and text messages popping up on our phone, to email, spam mail, being on the internet, you have ads popping up everywhere. We have more white noise communication than we've ever had before. And so we need to make sure that we're communicating in multiple venues in multiple ways, and never assume that one way or one time is gonna accomplish what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I also think that all call, when people try to communicate what's happening or what's coming down the pike from, say, the pulpit or during the announcement time on a Sunday morning, is also kind of very ineffective. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely spent quite a bit of my efforts doing the all-call. I put it in the newsletter. No one showed up. It's their fault, like.
Yep.
But I think also I have depended too much on like one mode of communication, and thinking, well, if it was in the email, then everybody should know it. And yet, like on Facebook, right? It's funny, Stephen, as you were talking, because on Facebook, we'll see a story come up, and then how many times do you see that same story appear later that day, often shared by another person, and once it's been shared so many times, then we become even more inclined to click on it because we've heard it so frequently.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also say, kind of in that same vein, that one of the things that we really mess up on is when we assume that digital and print communication is going to accomplish the job. Because what I hear more and more is that it has to be personal. It has to exist in relationship. It can't just be put out there and expect people to latch onto it. And so I think our communication has to be grounded and rooted in relationship and in personal interaction. And that's hard to do the bigger church you get to. So I think that's a difficulty the larger the church is.
Let me ask you a question about that real quick, though. Is that different depending on generation?
I think it plays in differing degrees based on generation. But I think we're all existing in this massive cloud of white noise, and whether you're 85 or 18, and I think the personal part of the communication it makes the communication, no matter who it is, way more effective. I know that I think, let's put it this way, I think that younger generations may be accustomed to way more digital, way more not written, but really more digital communication. But I think that the personal touch is still really necessary for them, and I think it leverages credibility with them as well, because they're not being marketed.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm curious. Well, you just said marketing. You said marketing. So I feel like we got to go there. I think there's a very different understanding of what marketing is and communications is. And I feel like too often, especially in the church, we confuse the two, or we lump both of them into the same category, when I believe that they're very different. I feel like marketing is something to motivate or encourage, or to generate a buzz or excitement about. I feel like communication is simply to communicate, is to inform. So I feel like when we are doing those two things, we often will have a different goal in mind. And I feel like depending upon what that goal is, we have to be able to adjust, one, the message, and two, the vehicle through which we are communicating. Does that make, you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. And I think that gets to the problems with the all call that you mentioned earlier. The all call and the bulletin or the newsletter announcement, I think, tends to be more about marketing and marketing a message about this ministry or program to the church than it is about communication. And we got to be careful when we do like an all call in the bulletin to know that there is a message that there are not enough, if we're looking for volunteers, right? There are not enough people here presently. And that tells a story about the ministry, and maybe just points to why that fails so much outside of the personal stuff. But so what are some practices then, Melissa, about communication that you've found to be really effective? Or if you could name one that you feel like is highly successful, what would you say that is?
I think I'm going to piggyback off of what Stephen said. And I think we cannot ignore or forget that one-on-one interaction is by far the number one best way to communicate anything. And so I feel like if there's a message that you all really want to put out, whether it's to inform or if it's to motivate, I don't think we can forget that just word of mouth and person-to-person communication is important. So I feel like what Stephen said is that we have to communicate things in a number of different number of different vehicles, such as emailing and newsletters and the bulletin, and perhaps that announcement at church for people who don't read any of that stuff. But maybe we have to talk about texting, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if, Stephen, those things were the things you were thinking about, but I don't think any one of those things will supersede the importance of person-to-person communicating. So if you're trying to promote an event that might be happening, to me, there's nothing better than a phone call. Or even better, in person, saying, hey, what are you doing this week? Are you available? We'd love to see you there. So remembering that person-to-person invitation is super important.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think branding plays a significant role in all this. That's something we haven't really talked about here. But branding does more than tells you about the actual event, and it does more than tells you about the times and dates and cost of the event. Branding is about the experience that you're trying to convey. You're trying to help them see a broader picture of what you're trying to do. And so a lot of times I think we miss the boat on branding, and we just try to market events and sermon series and Sunday mornings and things like that. And we haven't come up with an overarching identity of who we are. And in marketing, that's just called branding. There's a good book I would recommend, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Branding, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Marketing. Those have been really helpful books for me. But in terms of the personal communication, I'll just use the example that Bryant shared on Facebook. You'll see an article in the morning, it'll maybe kind of get your attention a little bit. But then as you go through the day and you see it appear in your feed over and over and over again, the reason why it's appearing in your feed is because you have friends who are reposting that. Well, that's personal, because what's happening is the number one thing that helps people buy on Amazon a certain product is the reviews. And so there is a person outside of the organization, outside the institution or system, who is vouching for that product. And so just like an article on Facebook, you might see it generate some interest, but if you have personal people who you know who are vouching for that article, you are much more likely to read it. Now, if you take it over to the church world, you make calls or you have people reposting your Facebook posts or Instagrams or whatever you're doing to market your event. There's, if you have other church members doing that, that's going to go way farther than if you and I are doing it. The other thing I would say in terms of digital marketing, image-based has to happen. We miss the point in churches because we think that our words are the most powerful tool that we have. And so we'll write these big, long articles about what's going to happen, and nobody reads them. Nobody cares, literally. But if you put a picture on there that tells the story, if you put a picture of the last time you did that event or the kind of people who are going to be there, what you'll be doing, that conveys so much more meaning, and people can visualize themselves participating in the event you want. So I think image-based has to be huge in this.
I'll share with you an experience I had with the church I worked with in Connecticut. They did a church open study, so they followed the number of times their weekly e-blast was opened. And they never used to have pictures as a part of that weekly thing. It was just what's coming up this Sunday, what's happening this week, et cetera, and maybe celebrate something good that was happening. The minute they added pictures to the end or embedded within those messages, their open rate went from like 21% to over 60% per week.
That's right. That's right.
And so I think you're spot on. I think those pictures are super important because those pictures tell a story. And when a story is involved, people want to be a part of it, So I think you're spot on there.
And I think Instagram is a great untapped marketing tool, especially in youth ministry. There's an app that I like to use, I think I've recommended before, called Word Swag. And it allows you to in really nice, clean fonts, write over your Instagram posts. So you can include the image with a little bit of text with it. And man, I think it is one of the best tools for marketing, especially in youth ministry right now.
And I also want to say too, the Facebook thing that you were talking about and trending. I think one of the mistakes that too many churches will make, they don't utilize that Facebook Places thing. I don't necessarily understand fully. Instead of utilizing the business thing, they will then create their own private or closed group.
That's right.
So people can't check in or really talk about you in a way that's trending. So check into that. If you are not a legitimized business on Facebook, you're missing an opportunity there. And then the power of a tag is also underutilized in many churches. If you're going to try and promote an event or celebrate something that's happened or communicate something to somebody, say, for instance, you have a speaker coming to your church to talk about something important to you, tag that person in your post, because then everybody who's friends with that speaker is also going to see your message. If you have a pastor who, in your church that gave a message and you're celebrating, tag the pastor, because then all those friends of that pastor are then going to see that post. So too often people are communicating on Facebook, but they're underutilizing some of the tools that they have in order to make that message go even further.
Yeah.
There's so few reasons, especially for a church, to create a private group. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that. But I think it speaks to something larger we do in churches is we hold conversations privately. So it may take place in a meeting and we make some decisions that need to be communicated that are going to impact other people or for some great event. But we keep it in the group and we don't tell other people. So there are those places where we do that. And I also, I think sometimes, like just on Facebook, as soon as somebody speaks to something, and you know who those people are, right? Like, if this person shares it, it's going to gain traction. And I think we can do that, and maybe not secretly, like, you know, like you might with gossip, where you tell one person because you know they're going to share the story, but we can do that intentionally. Whether it's a volunteer who you know, like, just loves to talk and chat with people on Sunday mornings, or somebody else in the church that is so good at creating excitement with other people. Let's very intentionally and strategically share the good stories with them, because we know that they're going to share it with other people. They may be in the choir, they may just be in a pew, but if they will tell that story and share their excitement, it becomes so much more and so much bigger. In the same way that somebody on Facebook may share it and suddenly gain traction on a story.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what it also does is it just gets outside of the main. People are already a little I should say more. People are already pretty anti-institutional. They have institutional suspicion. And so if it comes from the institution, whatever the institution is, whether it's a company or a church, you're having to overcome that suspicion. But if it's coming from an organic source, it changes the ballgame.
Some ulterior motive.
That's right. That's right.
You know, the other thing I have found that is helpful, and I wonder what you guys think about this, is communicating how we're communicating. And so if you're using email and Facebook and Instagram and print and bulletin, and maybe text as well, to then remind people, hey, don't forget, we're sharing this in the email, we're sharing this here, and we're sharing this here. What do you guys think about that? Do you find that to be effective?
You know, I was at a church not too long ago. We were doing some church-wide strategic planning with them, and we were doing a listening group with their council members, their board, and somebody said, oh, well, I didn't know about such and such happening. And another person, kind of kitschy person, said, well, didn't you read your email? And the person retorted and said, I get way too many emails. I don't open them anymore. I think it's a problem when churches will communicate everything everywhere. And so if they understand that, okay, well, the order of worship is going to be in the bulletin, and the times of programs are going to be on our website, and the newsletter is going to be submitted, it's going to be provided via print or e-blast. You sign up for which one, etc. I think that's a good thing, because what Stephen said earlier is about that noise. People become desensitized. They don't want to be bothered. And if they get 5 to 10 different emails from different people about different programs from their church, none of that ends up being opened. So you have a real missed opportunity, even though many people truly prefer email over anything. But if you're emailing everything and anything all the time, it becomes difficult for people to actually open the email. So I think being very clear, we have to remember that communication is a two-way street. And oftentimes I feel like the church is just pitching so much. You know, a lot of times people think, oh, the church is a bad communicator. I would say that some churches even find themselves in the opposite boat and are communicating way too much, creating so much noise that people are just completely blocking it out. And so I think you're spot on, Brian. I think we do, as churches, need to kind of, not covenant, that might be too strong of a word, but kind of come to a mutual understanding of this is exactly what we're communicating and how we're communicating it. I don't know, Stephen, maybe you have a different idea or understanding.
No, I really do agree with you on that. And one of the things I try to advise churches in doing, the way we consume material and information is very different than even 10 years ago. I think Twitter changed a lot of how we consume information. One of the things I will tell folks is Twitter found this kind of neat little niche with 140 characters. And then what the New York Times did, I don't know if I've talked about this on here, but what the New York Times did is they thought, man, if Twitter is communicating succinctly in that number of characters, then maybe we should do our New York Times emails that link to the stories in the same way. And so New York Times invented this email format where essentially you're getting 140 character snippets with a little link that we've become accustomed to. It says read more. And so instead of giving all your information out on the email, you give them little snippets. I think having the picture there is huge. Give them the little snippets and then have a hyperlink that shoots them back to your website. Because if your website can be that steady source of information that's always up to date, that is key. If you have a website that has stuff from 1992 on it, you're through. All right.
Or even last year.
Yeah, or even last year. Yeah, that's right. I don't even know if the internet was here in 92, but whatever, right?
A little too soon.
Have a hyperlink that shoots you back to the pertinent page on the website. So then people can glance through that email and find just the things they need, hyperlink back, and then they have the full thing instead of giving everybody all the information, which is just not pertinent. So New York Times did a great job in that, and I really recommend churches do that as well. I think it's really helpful.
Love that.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I think, especially in the church, people will say things like you were sharing from that story, Melissa. Well, no, I don't read my email. I get too many, and we'll hear that in the church. And rather than adjust and find a new mode of communication, we just say it louder.
That's right.
Right. So like, they can't hear us. Let me shout it, and maybe that will help. And then it becomes something that we intentionally try to like block out, rather than really reassessing, like how we're going to communicate and doing that in a way that people are listening. Because there are two parts. There's a speaker and a listener. And if I'm speaking in English and you hear Spanish, there's a breakdown unless we both know both languages.
Right.
Right. And so it's important too, I think, for churches and for us as individuals to really evaluate how the other folks, if it's our members, our congregation, how they listen is as important to the communication as how we speak, and then speak in a way that they're paying attention to. That takes on a different tone than just like shouting from the mountaintop, because there may not be anybody in that valley.
That's right.
Well,
and Brian, I think I would even throw in another question that's going to open up a whole nother can of worms, and I'm going to walk away.
We're just going to cut it off at the end of the question.
Yeah,
here.
I'm just walking away from this. But here's the question. Sometimes maybe it's not the way we're communicating, but are the things that we're communicating, are they compelling?
Yeah.
Are they even worth listening to? Because they might not be. And so sometimes we have to, I'm not talking about the message of Christ, okay? The message of Christ is compelling. However, how we choose as a church contextually to live out that message of Christ and to share that message of Christ, is it compelling? Because a lot of times we think just because we're a church or a religious organization that by us sharing information, people should automatically latch onto it. But I think we have to ask the internal question, is the message that we're sharing, is the way we're sharing the gospel and the message of Christ, is it compelling and is it true to the compelling nature of the cross and of Jesus? And so there's the can of worms. I'm setting it out there, and we'll see what happens.
Can I take a stab at a really like weak response?
I'm sure.
I think it's a great question, because so much of our communication in the church is about this next event that's coming up, and it's about whether or not you're going to participate and show up at it, and often leaves out the experience and the story of where people saw value in other people's lives, where people had an experience that was life-changing or life-moving, where people were served, all that sort of stuff. We leave that out when all we're doing is promoting the next event.
Right.
And so I would agree that we need to answer that question.
Yeah. But it's one I think we forget to ask a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point too. I feel like communication should be an invitation of coming along. And so when you said compelling, I would hope that the church that is communicating is asking the question, okay, well, what does this really mean? What does this really matter? Why should the person receiving this communication what is the goal? What are we trying to do here? And maybe they should check themselves before, if they're able to say, well, we're just doing the next event. What is special about that next event that needs to be communicated? Right. Why are we doing the event in the first place? And how is that event moving forward our mission as a church? And maybe that way of communicating could be exactly that, compelling. I love that.
Well, maybe we wrap it up here and just kind of say to folks that communication is not necessarily easy, and the more variance there is in forms of communication, the more difficult it will be, but no less important. No less important to do it intentionally, to have a plan, to really think through how we're communicating and to do that well, and to really sum it up in a way that's compelling, that's moving and invitational. So much that you guys have opened up, so many cans of worms.
We could go fishing.
And maybe you should. Maybe if you're listening to this, maybe you should just turn it off and go fishing at this point. And we might like to join you if you invite us. Melissa, how can people invite you out to the boat, out to the lake, to cast a few worms?
I'll watch, and I'll let you split the worm in half, because I don't get into any of that. But
wait, who do you fish with? You don't split worms in half. What's wrong with you? Oh my gosh, it's disgusting.
You're supposed to do that.
No, okay, just tell them what you do.
You don't fish often, do you?
That's why I don't like fishing. If you're telling me you don't have to split worms in half, I might have to sign up for fishing.
Okay, we'll talk about that later then. Sorry to interrupt.
You can reach out to me at melissa@ministryarchitects.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and the Twitter. However, love to chat. I would love to chat with you.
Yeah, and you can find me over at 12stonespirituality.com. I'd love to interact with you over there. That's the blog that I work off of. You can also book me for speaking engagements and things like that through that site. And again, love to talk with you over there as well.
So, and Stephen, I did count the number of stones in that picture.
There's 12.
There are 12. Yeah.
I worked really hard to make sure that was correct.
That's awesome.
That's perfect. And folks, I'm Bryant Johnson. I would love to join you on a fishing trip. Bryant@ministryarchitects.com or on Facebook, facebook.com/Bryant Johnson. We are overjoyed to share this with you all and to invite you into this conversation. So thanks for taking some time to listen. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, on YouTube, on Google, on Stitcher Radio, or any of your other favorite podcatchers. Thanks so much, you guys. Thanks for talking with us a little bit about communication.
Ha ha!